I always forget to record, so I pressed it now so I don't forget later. Hi, everybody.
Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
We'll give folks another minute or two to join in, but everything is well set up and should be super fun. All right, I think we've got a good group here and I'll continue to let folks in as they come in. I want to thank everybody for coming today to this presentation from the UVM Natural Resources 206 class. They have been working with the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District all semester on an updated natural resource assessment. And I think you guys are gonna hopefully learn something or be able to provide feedback and insight to this project. There will be a final report drafted in the beginning of December, and I'll send that out to everyone as well. But right now is kind of a, here's what we've got, and any suggestions or improvements or additional resources that we might have missed. So really looking forward to your feedback today, and also really looking forward to share what we've got so far. With that, I will hand it over to the UVM students. Please let me know if you guys need anything.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We're really excited. As Lauren just said, we are all students in the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources, and we're working with the Franklin County Conservation District as part of the NR206 capstone course. We're in the process of writing a natural resource assessment for Franklin County, as you just heard. We've been working on this all semester, but we would really love your feedback to help us fill in any gaps and connect any dots that we're missing. We're really looking forward to fielding your questions at the end and just hearing your ideas. As we get into it, we just wanted to verbalize that we would like to include a land acknowledgement, but we're figuring out the most respectful and effective way to do that. We were discussing with Lauren that this may be a good opportunity for her and maybe all of you to develop a relationship with the Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi. Again, we would like to thank you all for being here, and we'd also like to thank Lauren. We'd like to thank our professor Dave and also our graduate TA Ismar. So without further ado, here we go. Let's get into it.
All right, so to start off, before we can kind of dive into the natural resources of Franklin County, we got to understand what's Franklin County, what's the land cover look like, because that really drives natural resources. So we see here, this is a map from the National Land Cover data set from 2019. So we can see it's a lot of mostly forested area, approximately 50%. All of the yellow in there is agricultural land, makes up about 25%. I think 75% of that is hay, and then the other 25 is cultivated crops. We have the other land uses don't take up as much space. We can see over in St. Albans, that's where the most dense development is. You can see a few other clusters of dense development scattered throughout. And then our blues are our rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Then here we kind of have the breakdown, as I was saying before, forest makes up about half of the county, agriculture about 25%, water makes up most of that other section, pretty sparsely developed, and then that other 1% is barren land and all the other land cover classes.
All right, thanks, Jake. So again, before we dive into our natural resource assessment, it's important to note the population distribution in Franklin County. And so this is just a graphic showing all the population in Franklin County. And one thing that it's important to note is that the three most western and towns that border the lake account for 50.8% of all the population in Franklin County. So those are the towns of like Swanton, St. Albans City, and Georgia. And so it's really important to note that there's kind of an east-west population divide where the eastern side has way less population than the western side.
So talking a little bit about employment, I made this pie chart I actually got all of this, it's from the 2017 American Community Survey, but I based this off of something from the Northwest Regional Planning Commission's Regional Indicators Report. So just talking about like unemployment, educational attainment, income, all those things having to do with employment. And then we're going to be including a lot of census data, so just relevant categories. For example, we have age here, and this one's depicting race, and then also touching on things like housing, education, income, health, just putting all those and probably using a lot of graphs and things like that just to visually represent all of those.
So the next part of our report is going to be kind of a pre-settlement history aspect of Franklin County. I was focusing on the geologic history of Franklin County, which is very helpful in placing current land use as well as natural resources in the context of the landscape. This section will briefly walk through the geological formation of Lake Champlain, as well as its lowlands and the Green Mountain Range. The bedrock formation will also be talked about, and the subsequent or lack of subsequent erosion sheds light on the success of economically important industries such as agriculture and maple sugaring, which are really important in Franklin County and Vermont. The topography explained in this section also helps contextualize the county's westward draining of the land, clarifying why lake and river health is such a prevalent issue in the county and setting the stage for further discussion of water quality issues in the report.
We also note the pre-settlement history from a more human aspect, starting with the Missisquoi Nation and the Abenaki creation story is included in the report. We talked about their migration as well as different sites within Franklin County of note for the Missisquoi Nation. In Franklin County, the Abenaki Nation Missisquoi extended along the northeast part of Lake Champlain with its point in Missisquoi Bay and extended along the Missisquoi River. It's important to note that the Lake Champlain and Missisquoi Bay converge in what is now known as Swanton, Vermont. We talk about how settlement and migration and further collaboration within tribes were a part of the pre-settlement history and therefore the land use of this area during the woodland era. Specifically, we note the Bohannon site, which is a marker of Erosion villages in Alburg, Vermont. Though this is not in Franklin County, it represents the same presence that is shown throughout this period in Vermont as a whole. We also note that the ancient village of Missisquoi existed in what is now known as Swanton, Vermont, which was a large community hub during the woodland era. These are both noted by the National Historical Markers. What is now Franklin County was once again in what is now Franklin County, the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge was established. This is in the northwest corner of Franklin County and was established by the federal government to protect migratory birds in 1943. While Abenaki families were no longer able to use this area in the ways that they had traditionally been able to, there was a specific site called Grandma Lampman's home, which has been fought for and protected by the Abenaki people, officially granted back to them in 1991. We also note that maple and forestry were mainly managed by Abenaki people during the woodland era to create land for dwellings and crops, and they used fire to clear patches for this development.
So as we move into the post-settlement history of Franklin County, it's important to note that the Abenaki people still store this land today, both in Franklin County, across the entire state and beyond. And they continue to have active, thriving communities here, despite the common narrative that they once inhabited Vermont and no longer live here. And we talk about this idea of erasure in our report, both of Abenaki and BIPOC members. But one thing that we've come across in the research that's important to note here is that minority groups in Vermont are often ignored, overlooked, or thought not to even exist. And we explore the implications of this more in our report. Gaining official recognition from the government has been one of the major challenges for the Abenaki people, and they've struggled to gain sovereignty for the last 40 years. After a long series of policies made and then broken, appeals, denied requests, politically and racially charged arguments, and court cases, the sovereign Abenaki nation of Missisquoi finally gained Vermont state recognition in 2006, and they are still seeking recognition on a federal level. State recognition, it's important because it acknowledges the existence of the Abenaki people in spite of historical attempts to eradicate them. This idea that Vermont is one of the whitest states in America isn't just a report on our demographics, but it's rather the result of centuries of purposeful erasure, discrimination, and violence that we're now living the consequences of. And the eugenics movements in the mid-1900s was one of these purposeful movements to erase certain people from Vermont, targeted people of color, those with disabilities or mental illnesses, Abenaki people, French Canadians, and other minority groups. Hundreds of people were forcibly sterilized, and many individuals and families were so afraid that they either fled Vermont or changed their names entirely. Some folks actually changed their name multiple times. And this goes back to like the idea of erasure. It was and sometimes still is dangerous to be Abenaki. So there's this self-erasure that's happened as well. And eugenics is one way that Vermont's demographic has been kept purposefully homogenous, or relatively so. But when we dive deeper into the history of specifically Black Vermonters, our other intentional disparities and racist actions become pretty clear. First and foremost, our report outlines the history of the enslavement of Black people in Vermont and its continued illegal practice decades after its official state abolishment in 1777. And I want to make a note here that we focus on Vermont in this section of our paper because of a lack of Franklin County specific data or information. And we recognize that the history of Black Vermonters in Franklin County is largely akin to that of the state as a whole. Our report outlines the discrimination against Black Vermonters throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. These range from difficulties in getting hotel rooms and dining at restaurants to inabilities to take out loans to buy homes and property, as well as purposeful displacement to those who already owned land, threats, murder, etc. And we see the effects of this discrimination today when we look at the number of Black farmers and homeowners in Vermont. And you can see the overall trend of land loss for Black Americans in the past 100 years in the upper graph here with the yellow. And then this lower graph, you can actually see that this trend is shifting and a new wave of Black Vermonters is gaining purchase of land across the country. And there are a lot of organizations that are helping to accelerate the trend and empower Black land ownership on both national and state levels. And our report outlines a few of these projects. One key one that we want to note is the Vermont BIPOC Land Access and Opportunity Act, which funds the Every Town project, helping to get BIPOC land ownership in every town in Vermont. And our report briefly discusses other historical population influxes and talks about the history of immigration from Quebec, Ireland, Poland, Sweden, and other countries into Vermont throughout the Industrial Revolution and how that's shaped our state's culture. We also address the present immigration of individuals seeking employment, specifically migrant farm workers in Franklin County. And we also touch on the future implications that climate change has on refugee immigration to Vermont and to Franklin County. And our group thought that it was important to dedicate a pretty large chunk of our natural resources assessment of Franklin County to talking about the people who live here, where they come from and the challenges that they've faced. We think it's important to know who's here and what they're doing to understand how the resources of Franklin County are being used.
So moving on to the sections on resources, Franklin County is broken down, contains parts of three of the planning basins, the Moyle, Missisquoi, and Northern Lake Champlain. And we in our overview of water resources, looked at the major lakes, major rivers, and then their tributaries. We also looked at water quality issues and the priorities for conservation, addressing those that are on the 303D list. So that's waters that are deemed to be impaired. And then the stressed waters list, which is waters that are not impaired, but there are trends leading towards them becoming impaired, or there are stressors that are keeping them from getting to the best possible water quality. So in our overview of soils, we'll touch upon the distribution and characteristics of dominant soil series in Franklin County, and then move on to the human interaction with the soils of Franklin County. This includes distinguishing definitions and availability of prime agricultural soils, soils of statewide importance, locally important soils, and prime forest soils, which you can see on the map here. We're also contextualizing how our three land use sectors, agriculture, developed lands, and forestry, are dependent on these soils, where their interests may overlap.
So the next section that we're going to have is going to be the issue section of water and soil. Sorry, one second. So in this section, we'll briefly introduce all of the water and soil issues that we'll be contextualizing later into their respective land uses. Just briefly, I'll touch upon nutrient runoff, which is a large problem, namely phosphorus runoff. Using the tactical basin plans for 5, 6, and 7, the basins in Franklin County. This graph just creates a little introduction to the issue, showing the reduction of phosphorus required from each of the 4 sources listed in the reports in order to reach the total daily maximum load goals that were approved by the EPA. And then another issue that we'll be talking about in this section is erosion. We'll just be giving a definition and kind of explaining what the current impacted areas of Vermont are, showing the difference between what stressed and impaired looks like and what this looks like in streams and rivers versus in Lake Champlain. Then we'll kind of move on to talking about why it's important to prevent erosion, what benefits from stopping it there are, and who people can contact, what resources are available if this is a problem for them. We'll move on to talking about what gaps exist. There's like a lot of monitoring things that were identified as still needing new technology or more resources. And then we're going to move on to a close-up look of 3 streams in Franklin County that will use the soil erodibility context to identify why certain areas are more susceptible to erosion and kind of what that looks like for the communities that are there.
So delving into the habitat and species in regard to water-related habitat, we try to identify and describe some of the important wetland sites that are found within the county. And those include Lake Carmi Bog, Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge, the Black Creek WMA, Fairfield Swamp WMA, and all these habitats are supporting a wide variety of unique species. Those of which some include threatened species such as the spiny softshell turtle. And we also try to identify the major aquatic habitats, including Lake Champlain, Lake Carmi, the Missisquoi River, the Lamoille River, and some of the colder water streams that are found in the eastern portion of the county. And we also try to identify the future threats that these aquatic habitats are facing, including climate change, nutrient loading, and invasive species.
So now we'll be moving on to the agricultural section of the report, starting with history. This section will go over a basic timeline of mostly the dairy industry in Franklin County and modern farming. So from around 1789 to 1800, we go over the granting of Franklin County of those lands and the recognized settlement at that time, and also the origins of farming, trade, and the creation of a smuggler's road, which allowed for illegal trade with Canada. Then from about 1800 to 1850, as farms begin to become more developed, production increases, and there's more of a prominent butter production and output at this time. And from that, there's more of a transition from sheep farming to cows and milk production. And then from 1850 to 1900, we talk about how Franklin County has a population growth, which is kind of due to the Industrial Revolution and that period. So this increased demand for farming, and it also allowed for the first railroad to connect Vermont and St. Albans particularly to major cities. From 1900 to 1950, we see a decline of dairy farms up through 1920. And this is when the Franklin County Farm Bureau recommends protection of farmland and forests. And then later on in 1948, the Soil Conservation Service makes efforts to protect against erosion and fertility loss on farms. And the last section with this is from 1960 up till the present, where after the 60s, the population kind of declines again, and farmers worry about competition from out west and people moving to cities. Prices of milk decrease, and this causes dairy plants to shut down in some cases. But more presently, there's been a revival of the dairy industry, and we also focus on the rights of migrant dairy workers, information particularly in St. Albans, but also in Vermont and elsewhere, and fighting for a better wage and time off.
So after providing the historical context, we move more into kind of looking at what the agricultural landscape of Franklin County looks like today. That's specifically done through the use of an analysis of farmland lost between 2016 and 2019. There's a nationwide trend of significant amounts of farmland being lost. Recent times, this time period would include that. And this analysis found that there wasn't actually a whole ton of loss of farmland in Franklin County. It only lost about a net loss of about 315 acres, which is a fraction of a percent of all the agricultural land in Franklin County. So there's a few reasons that could be the case. There's not necessarily a whole bunch of development, some in those areas near Chittenden County, but that's not where most of the farms are located. But another reason is the work of the Vermont Land Trust and what they've done with agricultural conservation easements. Basically what they'll do is offer easements, which they buy the development rights of land, and they'll pay the farmers for kind of the amount of money those development land rights are worth. In Franklin County alone, this program has protected 41,000 acres of farmland. And I spoke to one of the people at Vermont Land Trust, and he said that it's still a competitive process, and there's still a lot of people who are interested in that conservation.
There are multiple approaches to combat the challenges facing agriculture in Franklin County. Most Franklin County farms are focused on a single commodity, usually conventional dairy, and this makes them vulnerable to economic downturn when the price of one commodity may fall much more steeply in relation to others. Diversification into value-added products like eggs, butter, cheese, yogurt, or bottled on-site milk can help to minimize the exposure to these market forces. Organics are another method of diversification of agricultural production. While organic farming had been more profitable than conventional in Vermont, in recent years, organic farming has not been immune to the negative impacts affecting conventional agriculture as well. Verizon's announcement that they are stopping purchasing organics in the Northeast is an example of these recent changes. Organizations like the Vermont Farm Bureau support agriculture through discounted membership pricing on supplies and equipment. They also politically advocate on behalf of farmers, supporting measures such as reducing taxes on agricultural land and exempting agriculture from Act 250, Vermont's land use program. Transitioning into green energy production is another method to combat the challenges facing agriculture. Solar farms befit the large agricultural plots typical of Franklin County. However, the latitude of the area minimizes the potential of solar farms. Wind farms are another green energy production method. However, a specific set of steady wind conditions is required and limits their potential in Franklin County as well.
So as climate change begins to impact Vermont and Franklin County more, some of the observed projections so far increased precipitation and increased temperatures, as well as increased heavy precipitation events. So some notable impacts of these trends for agriculturally based residents are a shortened frost-free period, increased erosion and nutrient runoff, and compaction of wet soils, as well as an increased need for irrigation during drought periods. So for Franklin County farmers in particular, we might expect to see a decreased dairy yield given heat stress in livestock, particularly dairy cows, decreased yield of cool weather crops such as apples, as well as possible opportunity for new crops that are more effective in warm weather conditions.
So focusing in on the water and soil quality aspect of agriculture, we take a deeper look at the required agricultural practices in Vermont, what their function is, what they stipulate, who made them, and who has to follow them. And this addresses a larger issue of nutrient runoff from agricultural land use. So translating this policy intervention of RAPs into results, I've included a graph from the Vermont Clean Water Initiative 2020 performance report that shows the large amount of reduction that farmers have managed to achieve, which is largely believed to be because of RAPs and nutrient management plans, which I'll be speaking about later. So in this section, we hope to contextualize the large role that farms play in nutrient pollution, but also the changing land use practices to help reduce the runoff and the success or failures of these practices. Using an even broader brush, we're trying to evaluate overall soil health of the county by incorporating data from the USDA Census of Agriculture and the Nutrient Management Plan program. The land use and fertilizer use sections of the USDA Census of Ags are used to identify trends between the 2012 and 2017 reports, identifying what beneficial practices have been adopted or lost in order to create an overall picture of soil health. Those practices are listed in the graphic. Then we'll be moving on to nutrient management plan, what their function is, and describe them as a resource, who needs to fill them out, who can help you fill them out. And then we couple this discussion with reports from like self-reporting style studies that dairy farmers have taken part of in Vermont to help understand nutrient management plans' role and efficacy within the profession, and what drawbacks and what strengths the program represents to farmers in Vermont.
All right, and then the forestry and maple section starts off by giving an overview of the landscape history. And the purpose of this is to give a context of changes in the forest over time and why they look the way they do today. And with that background, we dive into the natural resources within the forested landscape, such as lumber and wood products, heat and energy, and maple syrup. And we look at these resources through a lens of how they impact people. Franklin County produces twice as much maple syrup as the rest of the state combined. So that's a significant economic contribution, both locally and statewide. And then it was hard to find county-specific stats, but there's a lot of people whose livelihoods depend on other forest products as well, for work, for heating their homes, for building materials, and more. And then we give an overview of the current use valuation program and how that supports the economic viability of forests as forests, rather than for development of residential areas or other land uses. And then, let's see. And then there's indirect benefits as well from forests, such as recreation, wildlife habitat, and ecosystem services that we talked about. Then we move on to trends in those resources today. Today we're seeing the forestry industry significantly consolidated compared to the past. There are far fewer mills in the state. And those mills, well, the mills are importing a lot of the wood, the raw material that they're processing, and about half the harvest in the state is exported to be processed out of state. So the industry is now part of a much larger scale market and influenced by prices. Thank you. Development pressure is intertwined with the current use valuation program that I mentioned before, and the economic viability of forests. And one thing to consider is how development pressure has changed rapidly over the past couple of years and how to respond to those changes in maintaining healthy forests. And finally, the maple industry is growing and trending towards larger operations. More dairy farms are working maple products into the mix to supplement their work and income. And finally, climate change is an important factor in all of these trends. As a potential for creating unpredictable and decreasing maple yield. It could become a driver of development pressure with climate refuge, and it affects the forest composition, which is the foundation of all of these resources I mentioned.
So in looking at forest-related habitat and species, in this section, we were hoping to describe the various forest types that are found throughout the county, ranging from the floodplain forests in the west and the wetland areas all the way to the montane forest types found in the east of the county. And we also try to highlight the future threats that these forests and their associated species will be facing, including habitat loss and fragmentation, as Jake touched on earlier, climate change, and the invasive species and pests that are being found in our forests now. We also tried to highlight some of the resources that exist for landowners if they're hoping to manage their own properties with wildlife in mind.
So forests are a really important resource for water quality, and logging activity, especially the way it speeds up erosion, can be a threat to water quality. So in the Lamoille and northern Lake Champlain basins, forestry needs to reduce its annual phosphorus loading by 5%. And in the Missisquoi basin, this figure is 50%. So in our report, we look at the acceptable management practices, the AMPs for logging operations. And the goal of these is to minimize erosion, prevent discharges of sediment and other hazardous materials and woody debris from entering streams, and to try and maintain natural water temperature. So it includes things like drainage structures and planning out of road networks, management of hazardous materials, and also forest buffers around water bodies. And then also using temporary bridges for stream crossings. And then moving on to the developed land section and how that impacts water and soil. We start out with a map here of developed lands in Franklin County. You can see a pattern where they tend to follow rivers and then the lake shore. And this is a historical pattern of development that's pretty common to see. And all the impermeable surfaces that come along with this development are an issue for water quality because of stormwater. So in our report, we look at urban stormwater, wastewater, and road erosion as the impacts of developed land on water quality. For urban stormwater, we're looking at whether or not towns have stormwater plans in place, which is what's on this map. And we're also looking at the municipal roads general permit under Act 64 and where road erosion inventories are still needed. And then also looking at the impact of wastewater systems on water quality, specifically in St. Albans, looking at the combined sewer system.
So the focus of soil issues in developed lands was that of soil pollution. So this section identifies that there are no Superfund sites within Franklin County, but there are 12 brownfield sites. 6 of these sites are clustered right in St. Albans City, which is pictured in the map above, which kind of speaks to the role of development in the presence of brownfield sites. The pie chart below is used as a conclusion to a more detailed site description list that's written in the report, which basically identifies the ratio of active and completed sites in the county. And as you can see, the majority of the brownfield sites their remediation efforts are cited as completed as of 2021.
So in relation to some of the county's animal species, we were kind of looking at some of the state reports that have been done, which are identifying priority habitat connectivity blocks that are found within the county, and how these mainly are in the eastern portion of the county, and they have really significant ecoregional significance for not just the state of Vermont, but the whole northeastern region of the United States and Canada. And we found that there are several organizations working to conserve these habitats in Franklin County, such as the Cold Holiday Canada organization and Two Countries, One Forest, that are working on both sides of the border to preserve this important forest habitat. And with increased development, we try to identify some of the wildlife-human conflict that is occurring within Franklin County, mainly with beavers, bears, and people experience issues with little and big brown bats as well.
At the start of our section addressing the current land use of developed lands in Franklin County, we start with a breakdown of the developed land intensities as classified by the National Land Cover data set. These are broken down based on the percent of impervious surfaces, with open space being less than 20% and then high intensity ranging up to that 80 to 100% range. As we can see from this chart, most of the developed land tends to be on the low to medium intensity side. The lightest color open space is going to tend to be parks, golf courses, grass, and things like that. Your low and medium are going to be those kind of 1 to 3 family dwellings, and then the high intensity is going to be apartment buildings and heavily kind of commercialized or industrialized areas.
Okay, moving on from some of the current land uses and developed lands, housing in Franklin County. This is just a snapshot of where current housing is. And it looks like from this graphic, most of the housing is by owners, not by people who are renting. The only exception is that for male-owned or rented houses, it's pretty much 50-50 as to like owned versus rent.
Then moving into energy, as we can see here, Franklin County consumes about 4 times as much energy as it produces. So Franklin County is dependent on other regions of Vermont and the country for their energy. However, of the energy that is produced in Franklin County, over 90% of it is renewable, with hydro making up a significant portion, solar with about 10%, and then distillate fuel oil, which is the one main fossil fuel burned in Franklin County, makes up only about 0.5%, which is really exciting thing to see.
Okay, and then for transportation in Franklin County, it should be noted that 81% of transportation trips are done in a single occupancy vehicle. And so this is a study done by V-Trans looking at transit propensity within the northwestern corner of Vermont. And as you can see, the areas in Franklin County that were noted as high transportation propensity are located all within St. Albans, Swanton, and then some around like Berkshire. But other than that, it's hard to find good places for public transit in Franklin County just because it's so rural and spread out. That said, this is a graphic that the study also found, which demonstrates that most people in Franklin County, 53%, work outside of the county that they live in. Which is just important in terms of climate change and energy use because there will be more transportation, and it has implications on economics within Franklin County as well. In terms of adaptations and trends, this is a graphic looking at the percent population change from the 2010 to the 2020 census. And as you can see, most places in the state which are gaining, or in the county which are gaining population, are in the southwestern corner, whereas the northeastern corner, most places are losing population. And so this has a lot of implications as to where people are moving, where there are jobs. Additionally, I think the southwestern corner has some implications on moving towards more urban areas.
So as far as climate change goes for developed lands in Franklin County, two of the primary factors we're looking at are primarily open space and low density development, as well as increased precipitation, most likely as rainfall, and more frequent and intense storms. So what we focus on, the impacts primarily are on roads, especially on paved roads, since there is a high proportion of those in Franklin County, and the upkeep that will be required with increased erosion, as well as bridges. And you can see in this picture kind of a washout that is requiring a good bit of maintenance in Richford. And so infrastructure resiliency will be important in urban areas, St. Albans, Swanton, impervious surfaces and stormwater management will be important, as well as the effect on power lines and power outages, the effect that will have on services such as water treatment, well pumps, etc. And a little bit less focused on in the report, but something to note are the emissions from developed areas in Franklin County. Like we said, most of the energy being produced and consumed that is electric and comes from renewable resources, so that is low emissions. However, given the high commuting population and lower public transit, and that transportation is the highest greenhouse gas emission sector in Vermont, electrifying transportation could be a potential leverage point in decreasing the county's emissions, but there is a need for more information in this area.
Our report then moves into a section on recreation with a beginning introduction of historical recreation as well as current recreation within the Abenaki people. It's important to note that in our report, as we talk about the Abenaki people, that the references to this area exist within a different context as presently known Franklin County, as the boundaries that these practices and land uses existed in do not exist presently anymore, and the boundaries within them are also different. So with that said, the report dives into an understanding of the historical migration, hunting, and food production, which took up the majority of time of the Abenaki people, as well as their recreation, a lot of planting and canoeing and using Lake Champlain for exchange. The report notes that the planting and food production systems that were used were honoring women and girls as leaders of tribal planting. And then it moves into a discussion of the continued and current recreation within Franklin County of the Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi. Their headquarters are actually in Swanton, Vermont, and this acts as a central hub of facilitating recreation and a return to teaching traditional practices within their people. The report outlines a list of programming and community events, which are also noted here. Food pantries, youth programming, which center teaching practices back to the younger generations, as well as communal harvests, women's groups, and community events, all through the Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi at Swanton, Vermont headquarters.
When thinking about recreation across the state of Vermont, you might also think that it would follow suit for Franklin County, that people love to hike, ski, ride snowmobiles, mountain bikes, and do all these more extreme forms of recreation. But when looking at the state comprehensive outdoor recreation planning document put out by the state of Vermont, more passive and leisurely forms of recreation are the most popular across the state, and that also goes for Franklin County. The most popular form of recreation in Franklin County is lake swimming at about 50%, 41% in picnicking, and about 45% in sightseeing and driving. While this is important because both the passive and more leisurely aspects of recreation also intertwine and can be used for more extreme forms of recreation like hiking, skiing, snowmobile, riding bikes, things like that. Franklin County includes a number of recreational centers and facilities throughout its towns. These cover in St. Albans, Montgomery, Fairfax, Ennisburg, Fairfield, Swanton, and Highgate. We have 4 state parks that are recognized, which are Lake Carmi, Woods Island, Burton Island, and Killcare. These are great sites for picnicking, hiking and walking, swimming, paddling, canoeing, and camping. Franklin County also uses a variety of nonprofit groups to promote its recreation, and this helps collaborate between municipal organizations, nonprofit organizations, and private businesses. And so a few standouts are the Hardack Recreation Area, which is a great disc golf and walking trail system that exists in the summertime. And then during the winter, it also serves as a great place where people can ski, cross-country ski, things like that. There's also the Franklin County Mountain Bike Club, which is a chapter within Vermont Mountain Biking Association. And then there's also a vast variety of 5 different snowmobile clubs. And those are great for maintaining snowmobiling paths and also providing food and shelter for people partaking in that, that activity. The intrinsic value of recreation is that these are leisure and recreation are extremely important in terms of features of natural resources and social capital. So these exist within public goods that are provided by the government, but also collaborated amongst nonprofit and private business sectors as well. So all of these work together to provide this benefit for the community overall. Recreation is a right to all people of all different communities, which is why equity is a central principle of recreation. This has also been outlined recently in Vermont's state comprehensive plan for outdoor recreation. So this includes racial justice, transportation access, and affordability in major points. And the biggest goal of this is to improve the quality of life of community members and Vermonters. So this can prove as an economic driver for the outdoor recreation business, as well as create stronger communities, social capital, cultural capital, promoting health and wellness, inclusive for all people of all ages and abilities, and that way of intersecting both passive and active recreational activities.
We also emphasize the importance that the county's habitat and species have because they really support forms of non-consumptive as well as consumptive recreation in the county, be it bird watching and then hunting as well, which is really culturally important and valued in the state of Vermont as well as Franklin County. And it's benefiting the state and local economies and also being used by VT Fish and Wildlife as a management tool as well.
Before we turn over to all of you for feedback and questions, we'd like to acknowledge a few limitations of our presentation and report so far. We did not focus on air or light pollution, as these issues aren't very severe in large portions of Franklin County. In addition, our developed land section is proportionally smaller than our other sections and is not as robust and lacking some of the detail of some of the other sections. We also want to take this time to thank Lauren and everybody at the Franklin County Conservation District, Dave, Ismar, Sonia, and Franny for all of their help, as well as all of you who are in attendance today. The goal of this presentation was to identify areas for our report that need to be altered or improved. We would also love to identify areas that we overlooked and there may be some gaps in our coverage. Right now, if you'll bear with us, we're gonna spin this camera around so you can see everybody, and then we would welcome any feedback or questions you have. Everybody's in view.
Hey, good job.
Yeah, that's it.
For the students in the class, I'm going to suggest you take off your screen share, and that might sort of help.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
The stop share. That's much better. How's that?
That's great. You know what you may also want to do? You also may want to move your chairs much closer to the camera, because there's a lot of space between you and the cameras. Get it tight like you're talking Tuesday. Because not only are you masked, you're far away. So I would say even try to get like 2-3 feet away if you can. Pull in.
Awesome. How's this look?
It was hard to imagine, but even better.
Yeah, so I think we want to open it up for questions, feedback, thoughts, comments, hopes, dreams, aspirations. If anybody has, I guess, yeah, just like jump in, unmute yourself, and
I'm happy to start if that's okay with whoever's running the show.
Sounds great to all of us.
Okay. Maybe I can be an icebreaker. My name is Dean Pierce. I work at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. I am in fact a native of Franklin County, so I appreciate your work from that perspective. I'm a UVM School of Natural Resources grad, although it dates from before it was Rubenstein. So anyway, part of what I was thinking when I was sitting here listening was, phew, I've seen some 206 capstone presentations, but not quite as extensive as this one. So congratulations on all of that. I took a lot of notes, and I'm not going to do you the disservice, but there were a couple of things I just wanted to flag, and they really aren't connected very well. In terms of the lack of sources about Black residents of Franklin County, I was just going to mention that people working on that topic may want to explore history in Saint Armand, Quebec, just across the line, where there is a history of Black residents, some of it notorious. The thing to keep in mind is that, until about 1960s, the border was a lot more porous. So anyway, that's just a direction to go in if you are interested in filling out that section. Another observation, I guess, because I've been through some of this myself, you know, as far as the Farm Bureau, and my dad and uncle were Farm Bureau members, just the diversity of viewpoints. I didn't know if people also talked to or researched rural Vermont and NOFA for their perspective. I would just dare to say that the views of the Farm Bureau have moved in the direction of NOFA and rural Vermont more than the opposite. So it's just something I was going to mention. Whoever was working on transportation, you know, this whole transit usage, some data that I've seen, it's been a while, that's very interesting to look at is the number of vehicles per household. Because although, well, you don't have an incentive to use transit if you have 3 vehicles in the household. So anyway, it's just something to give you a different angle on transportation and how people use it. So go out there and take a look at that data to see if it seems like the opposite of transit usage. Because if you're making an investment, electrification of the vehicle fleet is a big push in Vermont. That is somewhat related. And I think I'll just close with this idea, and it's sort of a rhetorical question. To what extent did, as all of you were working at this, ask yourselves, might there be an alternative perspective on this particular issue? I know, having been in your seats, that it's really tempting to say, hey, the state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan is going to tell me a lot of what I need to know, but it's going to be the state's comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, and so it's going to be a perspective. So I'm hopeful that as much as you could and as much as you can in the time that you have, you ask yourselves about alternative perspectives on the different issues. And at this point, I'll be quiet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dean, just a quick question. You said the history of Saint Armand, Quebec. What was that?
Yeah, Saint Armand, which is immediately north of Swanton and Highgate. It's if I don't want to send people down a rabbit hole, but that's the municipality. It's Missisquoi County.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, can the group hear me? This is Kent Henderson from the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain chiming in.
We can hear you, Ken. Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Just realized
there you are.
Cover shut my laptop. Yeah, I really admired the comprehensive review this afternoon. My background is that I'm a retired dairy veterinarian that has seen a lot of change go on in agriculture in Franklin County ever since the mid-70s. A big change that I've seen is with the modernization of farming is the improvement of the equipment and with the land use that is happening on the landscape. The farm, the number of animals on the farm is increasing rapidly. There are fewer owners that are owning more acreage. With the development of nutrient management plans so that farmers can use their resources better, they're beginning to understand that a lot of their soil is really not very useful for modern agriculture. They really are not getting the yields. And it's better to retire this cropland that is really kind of been identified as critical source areas of pollution to our waterways. So I noticed that I did not see a category for land that has been farmland that's been retired and is being returned to forestry or non-use or to housing. And, you know, that's a concern for these smaller farms as they're leaving the business or and for the larger landowners that are buying up the farm. What to happen, what should happen with these more non-profitable acres that's hard for them to use the modern equipment on. So I would just kind of throw that out as a challenge. I know that you had some reference to diversified ag and some other opportunities for diversified ag, but I think there's quite a bit of interest in these acres that are going back. They're being converted back from farming, and I think it is really quite a significant growth area in the acreage of the state. So I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I have something to add as well. I'm Nancy Patch. I'm the Franklin Grand Isle County Forester, but I'm also the co-founder of Cold Holiday Canada, and I'm on the board of Two Countries, One Forest. So you mentioned both of those organizations. And one other organization I would recommend you take a look at is the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Reserve or Network. That includes the Champlain Basin as well as the uplands in the watershed. You can find information on that with the Champlain Basin program. They have a link to that on their, the cabin is part of their website, and we're housed at the Champlain Basin Program Center. So I would suggest you take a look at that information as well. And if there's any way that I could help with either the Two Countries, One Forest program or any three of those, actually, I'm on the board of cabin. So I'm happy to connect with anybody if there's information you'd like to garner. I'm not sure where you got most of the information. Of course, I haven't seen the actual report. Unfortunately, I've just seen your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll chime in and give folks a moment to maybe gather some more questions or thoughts for you all. I wanted to just, you mentioned hunting at the very end. I want to make sure we have fishing in there as well, that both of those categories fit there. I also want to acknowledge that one of the snafus that I made in creating this event, I did not invite any members of the Abenaki Nation to this meeting, and that is something that I will work on and focus on and be sure to connect with them to inform this conversation further. Blind spot that I have for sure. And the other part was, I didn't know if current use valuation also had a, would be useful to also place it in the agricultural section and how it applies to agricultural lands in addition to the forest lands. If you had any thoughts on that. You know, that I'll save any other comments for later. You guys did great, by the way.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. Can anybody speak on that comment? Any other current?
Yeah, I think a bit more of that will be in the report than what's in the presentation.
Cool. Yeah, our report's pretty hefty at the moment, and we're like still adding more information, and so condensing it into a presentation, even an hour-long presentation, we like definitely paved over some sections that are quite a bit more robust in writing. So yeah, that'll come in early December, like Lauren said. But yeah, excited to like add some of these edits that people have said so far, and we can reach out to folks who have offered.
So since the rest of the room is a little quiet, building off of something that Nancy had said, I'm wondering, students, is your report at a spot where you might be able to distribute the written draft or open up some sort of like a Google document or editable draft that folks on the call might be able to jump into and add some comments and suggestions to in order to provide you feedback on maybe more resources? And then another question was, I noticed that there was climate change data in the current version of the report and your presentation. I was wondering if you were able to look at, or if you're able to look at and integrate information from the brand new Vermont climate change assessment that came out earlier in the week. And that, it's fresh information, but with your existing sections, you might be able to do simple, like quick updates, replacing some of the graphs or adding a few more. And I think you'd be remiss not to include that information because it's so fresh and stakeholders are seeing it now, right? And so if it's missed, it sort of makes your report antiquated right out of the gate, or there's a potential of it. Then the next thing with the biosphere, Nancy, I'm so glad you mentioned that. And so yes, there's some good resources at Lake Champlain Basin programs. And I want to encourage anybody who has a good rapport with Walt Pullman. It's a busy time of the semester for him, but he and former colleague Tom Hutspeth were involved with that for many years. And Walt's really taken it on as a bit of a pet project in recent years with Jim Brannigan from Lake Champlain Basin. So
John Erickson at the Gund as well is on the board.
yeah. So if you have good relationships with them, you may want to tap them very quickly.
Cool. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, for the first part, I think we're gonna need like another week to have something that we can distribute to be able to be viewed by people. Is that right, everybody?
Yeah. There's a lot of nuts and bolts citation stuff that we want to make sure is done before we give it to other people to look at.
But when we do, we can share that with you, and then that'll be an easy way to distribute it, also with Warren as well.
Yeah, we're in the works of like rearranging the report to make it more cohesive and just read better. And we are giving ourselves until after Thanksgiving break to get that done, do the edits that we are internally giving ourselves and our peers, and then also some other like writing that needs to be fleshed out of it. Yeah, trying to think. It makes sense.
What is your time frame for the final product?
So our final report is due December 6th. It's coming up fast. Yeah, we have three weeks, I think, or 2.5 or something, until it's due. So yeah, coming up on it. It's mostly finished. There's definitely some areas that we need to work on, but mostly getting there. It's exciting.
I think it's
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's also important to add that all this feedback we may not be able to incorporate, but one of the big sections of our paper, after every section, we're going to talk about all the gaps in the report. So if we don't have the opportunity to incorporate the feedback on this kind of short time scale, it'll definitely be in the gap section and available for people to look at this in the future.
Right, and I just want to say the Franklin County Conservation District is committed to keeping this natural resources assessment updated and building on it and using it, and making sure that everyone has access to the information that was shared. I know for us at the district, we're planning to use it in a strategic planning process to help prioritize which grants we're applying to, which projects we're chasing. And so it's also in our best interest to keep it updated. Whatever the students don't get to finish, we are committed to continue to work on. And obviously things always change. And so we'll update whenever it's needed. We'll plan to host it on our website too, in addition to sharing it out to folks.
You spoke about the Farm Bureau. I guess I'd ask you if you've explored some of the changes in the agricultural community, and I would suggest the natural resource community. My perspective, and it goes back, as I was brought up in Franklin County on a dairy farm on the Missisquoi, worked in Franklin County as an extension agent and have been involved in the community for a long time. I believe that there's been a dramatic change in the configuration of organizations and the influence or lack of influence that these organizations are having. And I think it's having an influence on the use of the natural resources and development that has occurred or has not occurred in the county. And I would encourage you to really look at some of the changes in organizations and making up the agricultural community or the Franklin County community as a whole.
Thank you. Is a big theme that you've sort of observed being that these organizations may have played more of a role in the past and more of an important and more folks were engaged in shaping the direction of use of land. And yeah, I guess
I believe so. There was,
living,
if you go back,
and less
look
so
at-
now.
If you look at the dairy organizations, you know, there were a number of dairy co-ops. HB Hood, which is a company, and their company that was, or a cooperative that was associated with HB Hood, were made up of farmers, Northern Farms, the NEMPA, New England Milk Producers Association, and we can go on to a variety of others, all took a look or were engaged in natural resource issues and topics, and were engaged. Farmers came together on a regular basis. I've said this to other folks. When I first started as an extension agent, it would be, I would probably be meeting with groups 2 or 3 times a week, different groups. And that just, those groups just do not exist today. You know, one of the groups that I go back into the early 60s is the Regional Planning Commission. That did not exist in the 60s and before. And that came on board in the mid 60s and has, I believe, a continuing impact and influence on and what has been occurring and developing.
Thank you.
I've also, perspective is that St. Albans was a regional trade center. And as I look at St. Albans, without a lot of statistics, I do not believe it's a regional trade center. It's a suburb of the greater Burlington area from a trade perspective. And that is influenced and changed the economics and the use of land and use of natural resources.
Thank you. There's a lot of great info there.
I'll throw out one other thing, and if I can, I didn't mention, I grew up on a dairy farm too, and it's very possible that Don McFeeters, when he was an extension agent, had been to my parents' and uncle's farm. I figured as much. So this is a small world. And I'm also someone who I've done a lot of work in agricultural history with Bob Sinclair and other people like that. So I feel that history is important. There's a video that you can watch on YouTube called Land of Promise. And it was produced by the movers and shakers of Franklin County in the early 1970s. So if you want to get a sense of how the people in Franklin County viewed themselves, then it's, I think, maybe 40 minutes long. So for any of you that want to kind of reference point the kind of things that Don's talking about, check out Land of Promise, and it's on YouTube.
Yeah, that's a good one. Again, I was engaged and involved with that development. And so it does give an excellent, I guess, overview of what people were thinking at the time. And I think as you look at it today, you can see some of the changes that have occurred. It's a good history lesson.
Yeah, we'll have to check that out.
It's nice to have people that were part of the Franklin County scene for a long time. I also was born and raised in Franklin County on a beef farm. So it's nice to have that sort of background, and Dawn is an amazing resource.
And we're really glad to hear from all of you, and especially people who have always lived in Franklin County. We're writing this whole thing, so it's really nice to be hearing from you all. So thank you.
It's probably not a crime if this ends early, right?
No.
It's nice work, you all. Really good work, and I'm looking forward to seeing the full report.
Totally. Thank you all for your input. Yeah, Dave.
I want to add one thing for the audience here, and as a way to sort of like, give you all some additional kudos and provide some perspective for everyone who's listening in today. This is part of NR206, which is a capstone service learning course that all students in our School of Natural Resources need to take. Sort of a forced course. A lot of students show up being like, I don't even want to be here, right? And they're funneled into these service projects. Some students are parks, recs, and tourism majors. Some are fish and wildlife. Some are forestry, right? Natural resource planning, and more. Most of the students have never seen a full comprehensive natural resource plan. And of course, most students haven't been grounded in Franklin County. A lot of UVM work is very Chittenden County centric. It seems like going from maybe like not even sure what in the world they were getting themselves into at the beginning of the semester to getting grounded in the context of Franklin County and synthesizing this together in this draft report has been a pretty big effort. And so when you all review the drafts, if you have a chance, I just want to provide the students a little bit of cover with that caveat to all of you. So for you to imagine how far they came from the beginning of the semester to where they are now and what they're presenting, and knowing that with this big team and 3 weeks left, they might not be able to totally rewrite and change the world, but they've got a capable group of helping reinforce and providing a really good glide path out. So I also want to say, probably with the skills and expertise, you don't have to be shy about sharing, and if you think it's not ready for prime time, sharing the feedback to help the students level up, if you will. So, and students, just as I say that in front of the group, like, awesome big round of applause from this end too. Good job.
Thank you, Dave. We appreciate it. It really has been like a big learning curve for us, as like seemingly outsiders researching this place that really is only like a half an hour drive from here. But yeah, getting to talk to you all has definitely given us some insight, lots of things to add and more research to do. And like Jake said, we might not get to all of it, but that's just kind of how this project is gonna go. It's a big, Franklin County has a lot of things to research and put into a report. Yeah, I would say if anyone has any other comments, now would be a great time. And if not, then we can, we'll let you know when our draft is ready for review. It won't be until after Thanksgiving. And maybe Lauren could be the middle person there and pass our draft on to you. And yeah, appreciate any feedback. Might not get to it all, but thank you all for coming today. Yay. Woo. Cool.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And I'll be in touch with a version of this recording and then also the report when it comes out. And please do, if you have any comments or questions, send them to me and I'll be sure to pass them along. Thanks everybody for coming.
All right. Bye. Thank you.